Welcome to our official album review of Vince Staples' new album, Dark Times. This is his sixth studio album and his last studio album under Def Jam, so this does mark the end of an era for Vince Staples, and we were super excited going into this because Vince Staples always drops quality music, and I also feel like the West Coast is going up this year, bro. You got this amazing Vince Staples record. You got Schoolboy Q's Blue Lips. You got what Kendrick did in the battle. Like, it's really a year where the West Coast seems to be taking over. But let's get started with the artist performance category. How did you feel about it overall?
Listen, it's always a mixed bag whenever you go into a Vince Staples album, right? Because I go back to his previous studio albums, for example, like A Big Fish Theory or a Vince Staples self-titled, and you could find so many different types of performances and different styles across those studio albums, and I feel like this is no different here because you'll find Vince in so many different settings and so many different pockets that make it such a unique performance for this studio album. Example, starting off with something like A Little Homies, for example. I found that such a dynamic performance. The way that he was able to write out a bit more of like a dance-esque production was super cool to see. Reminded me of a Big Fish Theory performance, to be quite honest with you. And then you're also getting more, I would say, meditative performances on something like a Justin, for example, where he's a lot calmer and a lot more meditative, and he's trying to have his lyrics come off a bit more intentional, if that makes sense to you. Not only that, but I feel like a super underrated aspect of this album is the hooks. The hooks on this project are super infectious, even going on to something like Black&Blue, for example. Super infectious hook. I love the way that he wrote out that melody, and they're all calculated super well. Another thing that I like about his performance is that Vince has always been a master at this. He doesn't overdo his stay on every single track on this.
Short tracks.
Exactly. Nothing over 4 minutes. Everything is super well calculated, and most of the songs only have 2 verses on them, and he's able to get his point across every single time while keeping you engaged. So that's how I felt for the most part, but where do you think he strives within this artist performance?
Well, it's interesting because I feel like as of late, Vince has like embarked in this space where his performances are a bit subdued. With this album, with the last couple of records too, and I do feel like I do miss the more lively performances that you would have gotten on something, let's say, like Samo off of Big Fish Theory, or something like you would have heard on Outside off of FM, where, you know, he does sound a bit more enthusiastic, he does sound a bit more hungry, you could say. On this project, though, you do see that he's a bit more understated, and I feel like that does play into like a lot of the subject matter and the fact that he does want to come off like numb, and like the topically it's very melancholic, so it does fit the lyricism, but I would have liked to have seen a bit more like high tempo performances from Vince. That's why something like Little Homies is, in my opinion, the most complete performance you're getting from him on this album, because you're getting these exciting ad-libs. You're getting 3 verses from Vince. You're getting him, you know, pick up the speed on his flow towards the end. He just sounds a bit more present on that record. But like you said, the hooks was definitely an aspect of his performance that I enjoyed the most, just because it made him sort of sound a bit different in the sense of like being able to add some reverb to the vocal, sound a bit more melodic. And Etufe by far is my favorite hook on this project, just because of the way he uses the reverb on the vocals. It makes it sound like there's like this chant-like energy that's taking place, and it sounds like something that would just go off for like a block party or something.
Absolutely. In the ghetto, I'm a Martian, crash landed in them dirt-ass apartments.
Super catchy.
Absolutely. The way that he writes out those melodies for his lines are incredible, and Etufe is another example of such a dynamic performance, kind of like Little Homies, where you're also getting such a lively Vince, and you're getting those performances throughout the album, and it's another song, like kind of Little Homies, where you get 3 complete verses from him, and those I feel like are kind of the strongest cuts, if I'm being honest with you, as far as like artist performance goes. But when I look at it overall, Vince Staples was so calculated throughout this project. It was so well done, and I really enjoyed it. So where do you want to go with the artist performance?
I think a great rating is in order here. I think that it wasn't the most dynamic set of performances from Vince, but ultimately everything felt calculated. It felt like the flows were all fire. I even liked how he wore a lot of his influences on his sleeves. Looking at a song, for example, like Nothing Matters, you have him interpolating Paranoid lyrics and the flow from what Kanye did on that song, and then even interpolating the hook of Nothing Even Matters from Lauryn Hill, him even shouting out like Below the Heavens and seeing how that album changed his life. Like, it was cool to see him really wear those influences on his sleeve, and yeah, bro, just really top quality shit.
Absolutely.
A lot of comedy too. Like, don't play with my crib and go play with your kids, bitch. Like, turning a comedic hook into something that even sounds good in terms of how much it sticks with you. He did a great job here.
Absolutely. But let's go into the content matters. So I feel like this is arguably the most impressive part of this project. And when we went through the first live album reaction, by the way, you guys could access it on our reaction tier on Patreon. It was very interesting because the first thing I said is that I'm going to have to go back to this to understand it. I don't want to give any judgment on the writing right away. I want to really understand it, and I want to go back to it. And with multiple repeated listens, you start to find out that this is arguably one of Vince Staples' I would say deepest albums. And it's so interesting because you find this maturity and this sort of introspectiveness that you could find on other Vince Staples records, but it's a lot more melancholic. It's a lot more, I would say, subdued, but it's also, Vince is really expressing himself, and it feels like he's talking to you throughout this track. I think the greatest achievement writing-wise on this album, or at least the most impressive and creative in my opinion, is on Justin. I do feel like that was one of the coolest moments on the album for me because I picked up on the storyline right away, and it's basically about Vince Staples meeting, a woman at a bar. And
I think it's different than what we originally thought it was, though. But keep going. I want to see how you interpret it.
I interpret it like kind of blindly throughout the story, right? So he meets the woman at the bar. Mm-hmm. She was a teacher. She used to be a star. And then,
she could have been a star.
Well, she could have been a star.
Yeah.
She obviously went into teaching, whatever the case may be. And then Vince Staples ends up going home with her. And then after that, her little cousin Justin ends up knocking at the door. No. Okay, so re-explain it for me then if I fucked up on the lyrics.
So I interpreted the same way that you did on first listen, and the more I listened to it, I interpreted it as especially when he goes into that part of women lie. What really ended up happening was that he drops her off at home. He's feeling her vibe. He's feeling a connection between himself and the girl, and then he says,
he goes up to the apartment, right?
Yeah. There's a knock on the door once they're chilling in the apartment, and her eyes become bloodshot, and she goes into a state of panic, and it's because either her husband or her boyfriend is knocking on the door, and she introduces Vince as her little cousin Justin to the guy that's at the door.
Oh, I didn't think about that.
That was the plot twist.
Really?
But
where was this? This was towards the end of the verse.
That was
right?
towards the end
Eyes
of the verse.
Eyes bloodshot, like she had been seen a ghost or something.
Yes.
I don't even know what's what. Reach in my pocket, get the clutch, and she hold up, I'm coming. If it get tricky, then I'm busting. She said, baby, meet my little... Oh,
yeah.
You're right.
Crazy.
You're fucking right. That's so true. I thought it was the other way around.
That's how I first interpreted it. But yeah, I love how quickly the story progressed, and I just love the fact that we're getting storytelling tracks in 2024 because on most albums, sadly, in the mainstream, you're not really seeing much of that at all. But ultimately, I feel like a big part of the biggest theme on this album, because there is many you can grab out from it, comes on the intro, where you have these nature sounds, these birds chirping, these wine chimes, and then someone says, "To live is to be like the brother in the tree," and it goes from calm nature sounds to imagery of a lynching, and you're like, holy shit, this is pretty dark. And I think it's Vince trying to say that his upbringing has always made him skeptical and uneasy as he navigates through life, and I feel like he felt like he can never be fully transparent with people, and this music, this album is his form of therapy of being more vulnerable and being more in a space where now he's trying to put his guard down and really share his emotions and put them on display.
Absolutely.
And you get that also on something like Government Cheese, where he's giving you this bleak viewpoint of his existence. It's almost like this Friedrich Nietzsche sort of viewpoint where it's well, maybe all that's left for me is a dark abyss once it's all said and done. Maybe it's not as dark as Nietzsche because he still has a bit of hope in God, but he's sort of he's counting the days. He's with every day that passes, I'm getting closer to the end. Then he also, again, speaks about how he feels like he can be fully open when he goes through the conversation he's having with his friend who's locked up. And while he's on the phone with him, he's I realize I can't really share how I'm feeling because he's asking me how I'm feeling, but my issues are going to appear so small to someone that's living in a cell.
Absolutely.
So I can't fully even open myself up to my friend because of his own experiences and his own traumatic life events. So.
And it's also cool because he's also bringing in another dynamic of loss and loss of love on this project. And that's something else that I picked up on. Example, you go into verse 2 of Radio. The way that he starts it off is, hey, Mr. DJ, can I make a request? A woman that I love won't respond to my text. I broke her heart. I'm trying hard as hell to clean up the mess. I prayed to God above. He ain't never said nothing back. So I find that interesting because Vince Staples, obviously, throughout his lyrics, he's often talked about, his rough upbringing and, his ability to be kind of numb to everything and like, kind of seeing violence and seeing hatred and being a part of that and understanding the different dynamics that come with that. But it was so interesting to see Vince Staples like kind of explore that topically as well throughout the project, where it was like I suffered loss, but also in other areas of my life with love, and and really compromising the woman that I love, and talking about how he wasn't faithful to her, and
Yeah.
now one day he hopes that he could get it back, and it's kind of like this tortured poet to a certain extent, and that type of perspective is so valuable for people nowadays, especially maybe people our age that are maybe going through certain things in our life, and people are experiencing different things with this type of topic matter. So I feel like it's also very emotionally depth throughout, like emotionally deep, excuse me, throughout these sort of parts of the album.
Yeah, and while it is very bleak and dark, you do have some moments of like more positive messaging on Little Homies, for example, where he's giving advice to a kid or to kids that have been brought up in a similar environment, similar circumstances, and he's trying to give them hope through his lyrics. So that was a nice, refreshing point within just the topics within the album. Also, I love how you go from Government Cheese, where again he has this bleak viewpoint on like what the future is going to hold in, let's say, whatever afterlife there may or may not be. But then on Shame on the Devil, he's turning to God as he's feeling depressed and lonely, and it feels like he's almost spiritually desperate, so he has to lean on God as a crutch, as he's like sort of saying that he's longing for love and affection. I'm like, fuck, this is very deep to hear from Vince, and it's cool that he's
Absolutely.
being this open on Wax.
Yeah, another song that I really like on this project is Free Man, actually, where he starts to maybe recap his life in a bit more of like a world-esque view, maybe from the way that we saw it, talking about the Netflix deal, talking about starting to get into film and cinema, talking about how, he feels kind of free in that sort of situation. And I really enjoy that because, yes, while there is very deep and very, I would say torturous content matter for Vince, towards the end of the track list, it's almost like, well, he's going to sit back and he's going to kind of overview his impact and see that regardless of what he did or what he's gone through, at the end of the day, his impact will forever live on. So I feel like it is a beautiful album in that aspect. It's very honest. It's very dark at certain points, but it's also very uplifting. And there is a nice silver lining towards the end of the album. I think the content matter is amazing, man. It was such a pleasure to go through the writing of this album. And as we continue to go on and listen to it more and more, I'm going to start to pick up on so many different things.
Yeah, and I feel like the overall theme is just Vince being more in touch with his emotions on this album, and like letting go of that burden of holding on to all these negative thoughts and emotions, and suggesting that other people do the same. And like sort of like trying to find the sun on the cloudiest of days. That's sort of how I interpreted all of this. And ultimately, the content is amazing. I feel like the writing is more nuanced than ever. So in terms of songwriting, he really leveled up in that aspect
course.
more than any other aspect on this album, to be honest with
Absolutely, and it's so digestible. It's so straightforward, and I feel like you need that type of writing for an album like this because it's almost like Vince is talking to you, right? Like if maybe the writing got more complicated or whatever the case may be, it wouldn't have connected with the listener the way that it should have. Or maybe it would have, but I just think that it was a strength for this track list, in my opinion.
For sure.
It's very relatable, and when you go through it, you're going to find topics that you could really relate to. But where do you want to go next, Lou? What are we doing?
Talk about the features, and it was interesting because there was no actual features that were listed on the track list. So a lot of people originally thought, okay, there might not be any guest performances whatsoever. But once you go through the album, you do have around 3 or 4 features, depending if you count Santi Gold, who's speaking on the outro. And this was apparently taken from a phone call that she and Vince had after he played her the album. And she's talking about like creativity being linked to spirituality, and also appreciating that Vince got more vulnerable and showed that emotional vulnerability throughout the album. But first feature that pops up technically is Baby Rose on Shame on the Devil. She has these very feathery sounding vocals. They feel gospel inspired to me. And that made sense considering she was, speaking about God, God's love, and how it makes her feel special.
I'm touched by an angel. The Lord made me special. And I like how she just comes in at the perfect point, and she also closes off the song as well. So I felt like that was well calculated. But let's go on to the next feature. What else do we have?
Next feature was Maddie Davis on the outro of Nothing Matters. Very short, but she has these sappy vocals. It complements the somber vibe of the song. And again, I enjoyed it for what it was. I mean, that's how I feel about the features. That were they all super necessary? No, but they added extra flavors to certain tracks. So
Absolutely, but I don't think this was the type of project where you wanted to overload it with
no.
features either. Like, I feel like this is a very personal album for Vince, and he well calculated this, right? Like, maybe, of course, you would have wanted to see an artist or two, and sure, it could have been a cool collaboration, but maybe it would have taken away from the writing or the message that Vince was trying to sort of evoke with this project. And I also think that it was really cool that he did a very minimal rollout for this, and I think it kind of also plays into the features where I think he really wanted people to focus on the album. It was very personal for him. It was like, fuck all the extra fluff. I don't want you to concentrate on the big feature that I'm bringing in, or maybe all of these crazy visuals I'm going to bring in maybe for the rollout of this project. It's like, no, it's here. You guys take it, digest it as you will. And I think a lot of his core fan base is enjoying it for what it is.
Yeah, he's not. He's definitely not playing any industry games. He's on his own accord, and I think that he's just making music that's fulfilling for him. But last feature, let me know how you felt about it. Kilo Kish has a bridge on Little Homies. Some cool futuristic vocals going on with some distorted shit too.
Very minimal.
Yeah, I felt like it enhanced the production.
Absolutely. And it was more towards the end of the track as well, between, I believe, one of the second choruses. Yeah, it was between the second chorus and the third one. So, yeah, it was cool, and it kind of acts like a bridge towards the outro of the song. So, overall, I think the features were great. I think that they did their job. It wasn't anything too crazy, but then again, it did add to the track list. Usually as like background vocals or a part of a hook. Like, it wasn't necessarily those big collaborations, but you didn't want this on this track list. So I feel like the reason why we gave it a great rating was because of how well calculated it was for the track list, and everyone gave a stellar performance vocally.
Yeah.
And they were well placed. But let's go on to the production. Vince Staples has a great ear for production. He always does, and he always brings in so many different flavors into different projects. And I feel like what's interesting about Vince is that he'll always choose the right type of production for the right type of scenario. So going back, example, to like Big Fish Theory and having that be a bit more electronic influenced and a bit more brash, that perfectly fits his performances and what he was trying to do at that time. Even something like FM, for example, bringing in Kenny Beats for that type of production and having something with a bit more of like that dirtier bounce, that was super cool for this. But what's interesting about this is that this production's a lot more psychedelic. It's almost a bit hazy to a certain extent, and you're getting so many different flavors. So let me ask you, what's your favorite beat on the album?
Favorite beat, I mean, one that really jumps out, of course, is Government Cheese, because he's bringing back that whiny synthesizer that you had heard on Blue Suede, which was an earlier Vince song. So cool to see him sample himself there, and I feel like you're definitely getting a psychedelic, jazzy soundscape that is going to instantly remind you of Mac Miller's Faces. So that was definitely a standout. But ultimately, I just feel like it was cool to see him work with previous collaborators that were working with him on Ramona Park. Like, for example, Ken Taylor, who's producing on nearly every song. You had Saint Mino, Jay Versace. You got a Cardo beat, Alex Goose, Tyler Page. And I just love how much emphasis Vince always puts on setting an atmosphere. Like, for example, looking at all those nature sounds on the intro and outro, that creates a perfect loop for the album, where when you play the outro and it restarts the album, it perfectly transitions. That's something else that I feel like was a highlight for me throughout the production, was just how seamlessly the album flows from one track to the next.
The sequencing was so well done throughout the project, and also plays into the theme of it. And you guys could follow the content matter, like Lou was stating, within the content side of things, and you could see how it kind of progresses throughout the track list. But I also like that the content like kind of flows so well with the production too, and the way that you're able to follow along with it, and it kind of serves as this audio guide for you to be able to follow along with Vince. And I feel like that was a great aspect of the project. I love the beat on Little Homies. That's one of my favorite beats of the year. Has this beautiful summary vibe to it. One of the more uplifting productions off of the album as well. I love the drums on this album as well. Whether it's Little Homies or even something like Black and Blue. They're very unique. It adds this sort of groove to the album that you're not going to find from another project in 2024 so far. Like, you can't pinpoint, what type of drums sometimes that you're getting on certain songs.
Sounds nostalgic. It sounds like drums you would have heard like from the 60s, 70s.
It's so interesting.
Some fast hitting snares.
Absolutely.
But I want to talk about Black and Blue just because in terms of like sample selection, Vince fucking killed it. On this song, he's sampling one of my favorite modern soul bands, which is The Sacred Souls, and he samples their song Weak for Your Love. And yeah, like you were saying, the combination of the fast snares, the keys, it just added this intensity to the track, and
It was
nice,
beautiful.
nice bass guitar plucks too. Another song that I really fucked with production wise was the upbeat production on It To Fit, just because it sort of like changes the mood of the track list.
It does.
And then like he's rapping about like Magnolia and New Orleans, and then towards the end of the song you get this transition to this
Yep.
New Orleans bounce sort of beat. So I found that was really creative and really cool.
I also found that the drums on Etouffee were some of the most unique that I've heard on the entire project. And especially the way that they start off, it's so interesting because they're going to grab your ear right away, and they're fast paced, and it automatically gets you immersed into the song itself. So I really enjoyed the project for its production. I feel like Vince Staples has always had fantastic beat selection and some of the best soundscapes that hip hop has to offer. I'm giving this an amazing rating for sure.
Amazing rating without a doubt. But let's go into the replay value
Yes,
of
sir.
this album. And yeah, this is an album that I can play from start to finish without skipping a single song. And that's been the case with Vince for a while now, is that he's truly focusing on making these album experiences. I mean, sure, you might get something like a Shame on the Devil, or you might get something like a Law of Averages that comes out as a single, but it's not like he's making singles for the sake of them charting or becoming hits. Like, he's making compact, cohesive album experiences, and that's
Yeah.
why there's so much replay value, is that I can really go in and enjoy it as a whole. 35 minutes also, so it's super accessible to listen to, even for like just a bit of a longer car drive. There's aux-friendly songs on here, and Vince always makes music for the summer for me, so I'm going to be playing this in the whip and maybe at some functions throughout the summer.
Top three songs on the project, though. What do you got, man?
Top three songs.
Yeah, top three songs.
Well,
Because I agree with you, by the way, guys. Like, there's not a single fucking skip on this entire project. 35 minutes. Like, I think Lou stated it perfectly for the replay value so far. Like, there's really nothing here where you're telling yourself, well, I might not keep this because I can't get into it. No, like, the accessibility factor of this track list is so strong, and it's gonna be a pleasure to go through once again. But yeah, give me your top three, man.
top three are going to be number one for sure, Little Homies. Number two is going to be Black and Blue. And number three, ooh, is it Shame on the Devil? I really love his performance on that. But no, I'm going to give it to probably Government Cheese.
Very
My three.
interesting.
What about you?
Okay, number one, I'm gonna go Etouffee. Number two, I'm gonna go Black and Blue. Number three, I'm gonna go Little Homies.
Okay.
I think that's probably gonna be my top three. But overall, I think we're gonna give it an amazing rating for the replay value. It was a phenomenal project, and I'm gonna have so much fun listening to it. Like you said, over the course of the summer, it could not have came at a better time. Really, thank you, Vince Staples. If somehow, some way you're fucking watching this, man, thank you. Thank you for this project, and I wish everyone a good summer, by the way, because we're starting off the month of June very soon. But all right, let's get into our overall thoughts. I think Vince Staples delivered per usual. You know, I was talking to you about this, and we have to start having a conversation about Vince Staples having one of the strongest discographies in hip hop, especially for the modern era. The type of value that you get from Vince's projects is so fucking sick, and it's unique because you're getting such a pack of, you know, knowledge and also fantastic production and so many good vibes, but within these short settings. It's another album that clocks in at under 40 minutes. And there's no time wasted on this project. The writing is phenomenal. Vince Staples' performance is a bit more subdued, but it plays into the album. You also get high energy performances like a Little Homies or an Etouffee, for example. So if you're into that type of Vince Staples, you'll get it as well. And for the most part, you know, if you're into more collaborations, this is maybe not the project where you're going to find them, but then again, it wasn't needed for it. It's such a personal Vince Staples project, and he plays into all of his strengths, and there's not a single skip on this album. So that's kind of my final thoughts on it.
Yeah, it's just another solid album from a run of solid Vince Staples albums, and I feel like maybe he's not necessarily pushing the needle too much or breaking out of a comfort zone, but I do feel like he's evolving when it comes to the songwriting and when it comes to just the lyrical depth that he's showing on this project. I think that, you know, it's him showing a more well-rounded perspective of his own life and being more vulnerable than he's ever been. There's a lot of nostalgic sounds on this. It's well produced. You know, like always, you can really count on Vince Staples delivering one of the best projects of the year, and I feel like this is going to be one of the best rap projects of this entire year. But guys, let us know down in the comments, what would you score this album using our scale, and what would you like to hear from Vince Staples next? Let us know, and be sure to tap that notification bell because we are going to be keeping you guys my bad. We're gonna keep you guys fed with more album reviews as the year goes on. So thank you guys for tuning into this, and we'll see you next time. Peace.